Good morning, good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are in the world today. My name's Paul Webb, I'm the founder of B2B Energy, and you are listening to Energy Speaks Back. Energy Speaks Back interviews energy experts from around the world. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to episode 20 of Energy Speaks Back. Weekly, I present to you experts from around the world, and today we are in the UK. Our subject today is energy management subscriptions and how they support the energy experts around the world. Our purpose, as always, is to provide a good understanding of energy management knowledge from around the world, which is available today for us to deliver savings that impact on our planet. Today, I'm joined by the Executive Director of the Energy Services and Technology Association. And in his own words, he's committed to the environment, implementation and maintenance of standards, quality processes and accreditations, which is his key speciality. I'm actually very proud to have him as my guest today. So, without any further ado, I give you Mervyn Pilley. Good afternoon, Mervyn, and how are you today?
Good afternoon, Paul. I'm very well, thank you. My first podcast ever.
Oh, is it? Oh, well, I'm really glad that I'm the first person to introduce you and to interview on the podcast. So, and I'm sure after this, there'll be many people queuing up for you afterwards. I'm sure of that. So, Mervyn, good to see you again. We've had quite a few meetings, and I met you on the ENCO training, which was very powerful and most enjoyable and very exciting for our industry. So, Mervyn, can you give us some background to yourself within the industry?
Certainly, Paul, yes. Yes, my background is mixed, really. For a long time, first 26 years of my life, I was an accountant, doing very mundane things. Then I got into the wonderful world of membership, running trade bodies and professional bodies in a range of sectors. Energy really first came into my life when I sort of got into a slight problem with my career, because I got into the property sector in a trade association just at the beginning of 2006 when the world crashed. The economic world crashed, at least. And unfortunately, I was in a part of the sector where if people weren't buying houses, then that trade body didn't have a role. So I was unfortunately paid off. So I then had to find a hybrid career to keep the money coming in. And I found myself basically operations manager for a construction and fit out company with a mechanical electrical division. And really my first introduction to energy per se, or the world of energy, was very much on the retrofit side. The wonderful world of Green Deal, which I suspect a lot of listeners to the podcast will remember that wonderful government scheme that Greg Barker said was going to be a 25-year plan. Unfortunately, as I pointed out in a few postings, 25 years in politics is really not ever quite going to happen. But anyway, so we, as a company I was running at the time, we were offered quite a lot of work in the Green Deal. Unfortunately, actually, for us, some of the stuff related to high-rise properties and insulating and cladding, and reality, I don't look back with any sadness that we never actually got that work. But that was amongst the work that was offered to us by the local authorities as part of Green Deal. I then worked hard because it was a small family company, had been going for about 70 years, but they had no skill sets in retrofit. We got past 2030, which at that time was obviously being introduced. And I managed to get 6 of the 42 measures and managed to train up some installers, managed to get the systems in place. Having done all that, guess what? Local authorities had no work. All the work anyway mainly went to the main contractors. Mighty got 600 million, I think, for Birmingham back in those days. SMEs didn't really get a look in. But actually the work I was doing, it was really interesting because it chimed with a very personal feeling about sustainability, about it's not quite saving the planet. I'm not going to suggest I was an early Greta Thunberg. I'm too old to be Greta Thunberg, and I don't look anything like her, thank goodness. It was just that feeling about life and about the fact that I'd always felt how important it was to save energy, use less. Unfortunately, the accountant in me was saying use less for financial reasons, but my personal feeling was we need to recycle, we need to reuse, all those things. So it worked very well. I started studying actually the IEMA certificate at that point, but unfortunately for change of life again, went back into membership in a different sector. This was before ESTA, so I didn't carry on with the IEMA course. But that's how I really got into that world of energy. And there is a bit of overlap now with what I'm now trying to do at ESTA.
You've just mentioned the magic word of ESTA, Mervyn. What is
energy? Yes, apologies, because the world of acronyms, and having been involved with membership for a long time, the world of acronyms in my head is like spaghetti junction, really. Energy Services and Technology Association, which again, I suspect many of your podcast listeners will have heard of. And we've been going, 32, I think, years. It's not a new organisation. It did have a previous name, and unfortunately, I regrettably can't quite remember what that was. It was a much shorter name. I think it might have been just the Energy Services Association or something similar.
Yeah, I've only known it as ESTA for many, many years. And I remember the days when they used to have roadshows on a regular basis, which would be amazing.
ESTA used to be heavily event focused, Paul. I'm not lying when I say to you that it's had 3 phases, I think. First phase was very, very much event focused. Everything was around events. And in those days, to be frank, events were very well supported generally. The sponsors were plentiful. Everyone wanted to get around a room and talk. And then my predecessor, Robin Howe, who again, some of the podcast viewers will know, and now he's actually running the Major Energy Users Council. So he stayed in the sector. He was really tasked with sort of bringing ESTA back to being more of a traditional trade association, so putting in the policy and the public affairs and the lobbying and the information, that sort of thing was brought back in, I think, because I think that had probably not quite been what ESTA originally was about. It really was that events focus. I was brought in April 2019, and have tried to really drive some change in ESTA, trying to move us into other areas, sustainability, net zero. I should stress bringing the members with me.
So how many members do you have currently?
As ESTA, we currently have, I suppose you could say we have around 75. I say around, we just sent out our renewal, so we're in that wonderful phase when we're waiting to make sure everyone's re-signed back up again for 12 months. Yeah. We've also, actually, one other bit of information that podcast members, readers may not be aware of, or listeners may not be aware of, is that as from the 1st of January, we actually became part of the Energy and Utilities Alliance, which is a grouping of 6 trade associations. So we've become a division, and that combined group have about 400 members.
Brilliant. So ENCO is an initiative that's been driven by yourself and the Energy Institute, isn't it?
When you say yourself, you of course do not mean me personally. Although I do have I'm a little bit pleased to say, yeah, ESTA. ESTA is a joint project, absolutely. Yeah. ESTA and the EI, Energy Institute. I would like to believe I'm what I would claim some responsibility for. When I joined ESTA, I was told and advised. In fact, the very first event I attended, which was actually, I was a mystery shopper, because I started ESTA on the 1st of April, which of course is a great day to start any new job. April Fool's Day. Yeah, was it a hoax? Was it a con? Yeah, exactly. But anyway, I attended an event that was held in March of that year, which was, I hadn't joined ESTA, which was actually our AM&T event, which, fun enough, was the only event we managed to get over the line last year before lockdown. It was traditionally a March event. Went along to that event, and actually one of the presentations at that event was all about this wonderful new behaviour change movement. When I finally joined ESTA, we'd been talking about, various people, members of ESTA, have been talking about behaviour change for quite a long time. I understand there was an informal group within ESTA that had been doing this preparation and work. To be honest, what I found out was that Robin really hadn't helped develop it very much as chief exec. He hadn't had much time. He knew he was leaving ESTA because he had a long 6-month notice period. So his focus tended to be sort of other things rather than behaviour change. So when I joined, I said, no, this is an important area. It's got a lot of potential. We were lucky because John Mulholland rejoined ESTA to really pick up the reins again, because he'd left previously. So between us, and it was a team effort, I would stress, and others involved as well, I'm glad where we've got to. It is Energy Conscious Organisation, which is the ENCO bit of the acronym. And I think it's global. It's a global program. It's certainly intended to be a global program. So I'm pleased. I think it was one of the success stories for ESTA of 2020. Not a great year for many membership organisations, but I do think it was a relatively strong success story.
Well, I done the program and I thought it was very, very useful. One of the areas I focus on in energy management is the zero cost or the no cost elements of energy management, and they should be another phraseology is the low hanging fruit, which is you need to be focused on an organisation.
I think it's madness because, you could say, as an outsider looking in, and I'm not an energy management professional, my knowledge and experience has come through the retrofit side and that form of energy efficiency. But to me, it's an absolute no-brainer that you shouldn't think that actually using less energy first, the first fuel concept, just makes an absolute total and utter sense to everything. When you look at the alternatives that are being pushed out there as solutions for carbon, net zero, everything about all these majorly expensive things like carbon capture, storage, vast amounts of money. I mean, the 2019 budget, 830 million. Obviously, that a lot's changed since that budget, so probably none of those figures are still relevant. But when you look at what was allocated for carbon capture storage against simple using less energy, it just doesn't make any sense. And interestingly enough, on the ENCO side, we are looking at energy conscious organisations as a sort of standalone certification model outside of the training. So we're hoping that people who do the training, like yourself, go on and encourage clients to become organisations.
There's a bit I like about it.
And actually, that's also segues very nicely into another thing we're driving, or I'm trying to drive at ESTA, is this energy efficiency for non-domestic usage. Because the government's Green Homes Grant scheme, and at the end of the day, I think everyone's generally aware that it certainly is not really achieving everything was intended. It's not managing to deliver what was hoped for. And the government's spending a lot of money, whatever, 2 billion on that scheme. It may not all be spent, and I don't think there's going to be as much available. They've extended the year to a second year, but I don't think much is going to be left, or much is going to be carried over. All the focus on individuals, householders, homeowners. Now, actually, non-domestic energy efficiency, using less, so businesses, charities, public sector, which is interesting. I can talk about that as well, how really ENCO behaviour change isn't at the moment specified in the public sector decarbonisation fund, for example. So the billion that came across there's no mention of behaviour change. So yes, to me, it's just silly, and I can't see any sense that people are not being actively encouraged to use less energy.
It's interesting you said coming from the outside looking at things, from the energy, because your background is accounting.
Now, an accountant looking at, you see, that's that also, yeah.
My spin on that from an accountant's point of view is he's going to get all that energy management, energy savings, and he hasn't had to spend any money to get to that.
Well, you would hope so, Paul, but one of my challenges for the SME market has been very much the opposite. I think, and funny enough, I have a bit of an involvement in this because as well as that retrofit aspect of that role I had with the construction company, I was also acting as a facilities manager for that company. So we had an audit, we did an audit, and we had X number of measures put through potentially that we could have put in the building to save energy.
Right.
Unfortunately for me, apart from the fact that most of them were not possible for planning regulation purposes, we couldn't put a wind turbine on the roof because the bylaws said no. There was asbestos, I think, in the roof somewhere, which meant we couldn't put solar on. We were facing the wrong direction, so we couldn't, whatever. And also, as fast as we were looking at saving money through energy efficiency, the price of gas, price of fuel, price of energy was going up. And now my concern is from an SME and an accountant side or finance director is if all they see is they're signing bigger and bigger checks to pay bigger and bigger bills as fast as they're trying to put in the energy efficiency measures. Well, so while energy prices have been going up, it's obviously not that psychological aspect, which for SMEs I think is important. They need to have that real seeing of saving. But it's also interesting because the government's concept of not having any funding available, for example, for ENCO or for energy efficiency. And the argument was, well, we don't have any funding. Well, I said, well, hang on, this is a circular process because in theory, at least, if you're funding energy efficiency measures, then profits in the non-domestic sector, profits will go up.
Yeah.
Corporation tax take will go up, or self-employed tax will go up. VAT would go up. It's circular. So in theory, at least, if energy efficiency is effective, then yes, you're right. As an accountant, more profit, more tax.
Yeah. So there's a lot of benefits financially to progress this?
Well, to the government, well, it should be, but of course the government works in silos. I've been working with various ministries in governments for 20 years now, lobbying all sorts of governments with different, all sorts of ministries rather, with different some of the old acronyms, some of the old ministries that have now morphed into others, including the DTI, which of course is now BEIS, which actually is, when I joined ESTA, because I did some work with DEC and DTI, and before that, whatever it was before that, previous parts of that ministry. What really upset me and shocked me was how energy had been shoehorned into BIS. And of course, the energy bit has really, I think, lost out substantially to that, because, and in fact, interesting, when I used to have some discussions with Alan Whitehead at our event, we had him at our conference in October 2019, had chats with Alan about various things, and he made it fairly clear that if we'd had a change of government in December 2019, then DEC would have probably been brought back.
Right.
As a ministry. And I have to say, I totally and utterly agreed with that, because I think energy's sort of been shoehorned in to BIS. We've had this amazing situation with Alok Sharma sort of being allowed the time to do chair of COP26, because I think everyone probably thought that it might not be possible to be a cabinet minister and also be chairing one of the most important global events, for a very long time ahead, really, to get COP26 right.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, it's just lobbying with ministers, with government energy policy. It's a battle. It's not an easy. Sometimes it's a hard part of the job.
Was you involved with the SECRA, the Streamlined Energy Carbon Reporting legislation that was recently released?
I've been aware of it. I'm not going to suggest that I've got any great comments to make about it. I know there's most of the discussion I've had with members, certainly the consultant members, is about ESOS. I know how disappointed they are with ESOS in terms of the recommendation issue, a bit like the problem I had with that construction company.
Yeah.
Lots of recommendations from the auditor. How many of those could we actually put into? To be fair, I did try to put some of them in place, but as I said, we couldn't. But I get the feeling now, and it's interesting because behaviour change is one of the things we've been talking about with the ENCO programme, because that's primarily come from the consultants part of ESTA. Not surprisingly, because of course they push 50,001, they push ESOS. You said that they're all about that reporting. And I think one of the frustrations has been is that behaviour change hardly doesn't seem to get mentioned in many ESOS reports.
Yeah.
But equally, and this back to the government side of things, how is anyone actually putting any pressure on any of the companies to, once they've reported, to actually put it in place? Now, on that front, and this is sort of linked into what we've been talking about with incentives, I'm a carrot and stick person. And you're right, the accountant in me categorically believes that you have to have carrots and sticks from government policy. Yes, the private sector's got to do a lot, and this government's expecting the private sector to deliver a heavy amount of push. I think out of the 30 billion they think we need, they're going to offer about, well, they haven't offered 9, which was their manifesto promise, but they've offered whatever they're offering at the moment, 6. Private sector's got to do 24 billion of the rest towards our carbon targets, our net zero targets. The bad news is, the very time they were talking about doing that, they took away the enhanced capital allowances scheme for the energy technology list, which was a bit of a bum steer. If you're a company and you're looking to invest in capex to get energy efficiency equipment into your company, if you had a scheme where you got 100% write down in the first year, if you bought the right equipment on that list, and then to suddenly lose all that and go back to 3-year write-off or 4-year 25% capital allowance, that was bizarre. And I have to be honest, a bit like the ESOS side, to me, business, even if government don't want to spend the money, they expect the private sector to do it all. Well, at least they could incentivize through the tax system. Yeah. And it really is a shame that there isn't that incentive. In fact, I would go further, actually, what I've suggested to some of the civil servants I've spoken to. I remember a time in the 80s when I was doing a practicing accountant, when I used to remember the first year allowances, where companies would get up to 150% of the spend in the first year if they bought from a certain UK manufacturer, because everyone was trying to stimulate UK manufacturing. Enhanced first year allowances was a really quite a successful route. A bit like the R&D situation, where again, tax relief on that R&D spend, which again, the scheme may not have worked quite the way it's intended. But the point I'm making is carrot and stick. But if you're going to have sticks, planning laws, for example, which brings us into another potential area, the future home standard, you've got to have enforcement, because of course local authorities have been doing most of the have responsibility for the planning regs. And the planning regs, if they're not enforced, no matter what you put in those planning regs to make things more efficient, they need to be enforced. And the ESOS really, if you don't enforce the measures, you don't say to someone, look, if you did these measures, we give you tax relief in some way, or and the government's tinkering. I mean, I know they've talked about local council tax relief for energy efficiency measures. There was a consultation document I think came out last year along those lines to see if it could be incentivized through local tax rather than national. Mm-hmm. But then of course you've got a big problem there, because do actually any local authorities have any resources left that they have any control over? Probably not. This is turning into an economics and accountancy lecture. Yeah. Apologies, a tax lecture. Which it wasn't intended to be. And sorry, any podcast listeners who aren't interested in tax or economics.
I think it's interesting to hear the challenges that we've got in the UK regarding this. And it's interesting from my point of view, because I never hear this side of the story really. So let's touch on more about ESTA and what's your plans for this year? You've got plans for what's going to happen? Or can you plan, obviously?
I could be flippant and say to survive, Paul, but I'm not going to do that. Last year, well, I mean, obviously, I've already alluded. I started on April Fool's Day 2019. So the first few months were interesting about Brexit. Were we going to? When were we going to? Would we survive? You know, et cetera, et cetera. Got to the end of October, got through that routine. Then, of course, the election, and we had some really wonderful discussions about some interesting policies that from a potential Labour government, nationalising the grid, using the proceeds from nationalising the grid to fund the 60 billion retrofit revolution, and of course give everyone free Wi-Fi. But why would it, or good internet connection? But that's not relevant in today's world of politics, is it? Said he. No. Anyway, and then just thinking in January, I thought, I've got some clear water now. We know who the government is. We know that Brexit's happened.
The first couple of weeks, wasn't it?
Too many. No, we were lucky. We got a bit further than that, and then it was COVID. And of course, a lot of the stuff I'd started discussions about things with and projects and stuff I was working on, unfortunately, yet again, got diverted, got pulled back. Plans for COVID for this year. No, sorry, mental slip. Plans for ESTA for this year. Like any membership body, we've got to be honest and frank and say, look, a lot of businesses, a lot of members are really suffering. Mm. Those that need client contact, face-to-face contact, really clearly are suffering hugely. Perhaps other members are not. Perhaps there are some. I feel like I've got a two-stream membership, fast and slow, at the moment, and most of last year. But that said, I'm pushing ahead. Plans for ESTA. We've got. Working hard on SME aggregation models, group models to try and get the SMEs more involved in energy efficiency. And instead of trying to do it through sort of one company at a time or one SME at a time, I'm using trade associations as a conduit. So I'm talking to trade associations in sectors where they're high energy using. And critically, which is important to me because I believe I have a lifetime of experience in SMEs, it's the bill paying energy owning, property owning SMEs that we're talking about.
Yeah.
The government keep on, and Philip Hammond, that late departed Chancellor, who was Chancellor in April 2019 when I joined, the first thing I went to at Bays was a consultation around SME energy efficiency. Wonderful concepts, interesting discussions, interesting dialogue. Main problem was they have never quite understood the SME market. They should have realized they have 2 million gig workers, Uber drivers, Deliveroo people, all those people who deliver the pizzas, and now the Greggs and other sandwiches are available. I should have said that. This is a non-advertising podcast. All those wonderful people in that.
Out, I think.
all those wonderful people, all those wonderful SMEs. And at the end of that, I listened to the solutions they offered. Zero interest finance, which actually, fun enough, I think everyone thought actually might be the best option for energy efficiency. Loans, in other words, energy efficiency loans, auction and commercial escrow options. Lo and behold, they went for the auction option. It took them over a year to actually come back with that. Now, I actually, at the end of that session with Bays, I came away and thought, actually, there's a better route here. If you want to tackle the SME market, I think you need to segregate it. And clearly, there's no point in getting either the Uber drivers who are only using petrol or diesel in their car. What you need to do is get to the sectors, and I chose the climate change agreement sectors, the sectors where we know that is the high energy using sectors, the manufacturers, etc. Within those trade associations, a good trade association knows its members, and they can help you identify the bill owning SMEs in membership. At the time, it seemed like a good conduit anyway, because they all have events, they all have magazines, trade journals, they all have newsletters. And it struck me as such an obvious no-brainer. And one of the big challenges that Bays admitted they'd had was communicating with the SME market. How do you actually talk to the SME market? You could use the FSB, potentially, although the FSB has its own challenges, in terms of, yes, it's a big organization, it's got 150,000 members, etc. But back to what I said earlier, that would also include all those Uber drivers and gig workers. It doesn't really target the marketing and the focus. Anyway, so that was I've had a few initiatives, engagement with more sectors, engagement with end users. The other massive project this year, as well as getting that SME project moved further on, is also end user engagement. That March event in 2019 I went to, when I said I was a mystery shopper, I went and spoke to all of our exhibitors who were ESTA members. And they were very honest with me, and I was trying to be frank about what I was trying to get out of them. What are you getting out of this event? Why have you come here? Why are you exhibiting? And there was a disappointment generally that there weren't enough customers in the room. There weren't enough end users in the room. Who are we selling to? If we're just selling to each other, then clearly we're not going to make any money. And if it's all just ESTA members, we're not going to make any income out of that either. And that just pushed me really hard. And then I went to an interesting show that was run by Jeff Curran at Energy Live News in June 2019, which was the Energy Solutions Show, a new show for him. He hadn't done that show before. And I was struck that I was standing on the stand at ESTA, I was manning an ESTA stand, and basically quite a few quite large commercial companies came along, some quite big retail chains, and said, look, Mervyn, what can ESTA do for us in energy efficiency terms? And I had to scratch my chin a bit and thought, well, reality, I can't give you a lot of information today on the stand, but I'm sure we'll have members who can offer you all the solutions you need. Came away from there, spent quite a lot of time putting the March 2019 discussion with the exhibitors plus that event together, and thought what we need to do is an end user engagement. I call it a hub, information center, whatever you call it. Yeah. Goes back to the old days, and this predates me by a long time in the energy sector at least, and that's back to the Andrew Buckley days, the Energy Information Centre, and that knowledge for end users.
Yeah, the document.
Yeah, that's right. And the two things I'm driving forward now, and I want to get through in 2021, is that end user piece, end user engagement piece, which would be just a conduit for all sorts of information, podcast, webinar, white paper, article, you name it. That's the sort of information I want. Interestingly, there is a link between the auction that I mentioned earlier and that hub, because, and this, I think they're fixing the energy technologists. At the very same time they pulled the enhanced capital allowances, the reason they gave for pulling that scheme was because they said that HMRC had far too much control over what technology could go on the list.
Right.
Now, regrettably, and I'm going to say I'm a huge fan of HMRC as an accountant. I'm not going to lie on this podcast. Big issues with HMRC, to my mind, having any link to technology and choosing which technologies might qualify. It was all to do with the capital allowances scheme, which was, as an accountant would tell you, does it move? Is it fixed to a wall? Is it whatever? The rules to actually qualify for capital allowance cost. And the government said, well, look, we're taking away the ACA, which made no sense to anybody. But anyway, what they said was, oh, look, great news. It means we can open up the list to every type of solution, software, SaaS, you name it, we can open the list up to that. And for that reason, it's going to become a compare the market.com site for energy technology. I know, not the compare the meerkat. That ad drives me mad as well. I'm now thinking of a meerkat sitting in front of me instead of yourself, Paul. Bizarre, unfortunately, and it's developing, it's growing, but I'm going to say that what they've come up with, it's on a government website because it's obviously part of .gov.uk, and I've always been deeply suspicious of why any consumer, any commercial end user is going to want to go to a government website to choose their energy technology or their solution. My concept is, and this is a world first, this is a global exclusive, I'm trying to put a customer user friendly interface between the end user hub and the energy technology list. Yeah. I've had some people doing some research on the list, and it's got, I don't know, 14,000 or it may be 140,000. I may have missed a zero off products. But unless you've got a PhD in energy management or energy engineering, any SME certainly coming on to look for a solution. If you have 140,000, in fact, someone said to me they've got a fantastic list of hair dryers, apparently. So if an SME wanted to buy hair dryers, they've got all the hair dryers, they've got the energy efficiency of that hair dryer, they've got the ingrained carbon in producing that hair dryer. You'd name it, they've got it. Doesn't actually say how effectively it dries your hands, but anyway, that's a separate issue. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is all like a jigsaw puzzle for me. Being in charge of ESTA, it's pulling all these bits of the jigsaw puzzle together to get a cohesive whole. And unfortunately, at the moment, and this is not a political statement, I don't think much of what policy-wise, at least, has happened is cohesive.
Yeah.
It's to be fair, obviously a pandemic has derailed a lot, as it has with ESTA. The pandemic has clearly slowed up. I was brought into ESTA to drive change, and I tried hard. I mean, I was on the verge of creating an EV group for ESTA. ESTA had been nowhere near EVs before. There was not, they were obviously aware of them, and some of the ESTA members have got obviously EVs in their process, but it was something unique. I'd also looked at storage. I looked at a whole range of other areas. I'm passionate about sustainability, so circular economy. I'm also very interested in net zero. So even before Jeff and Sumit were rebranding to Net Zero Live, and others have rebranded, everything's net zero now, and all the journals and all the press. I was trying to get ESTA to move in that direction, which is why, and it's back to my old life of retrofit. So I'm trying to build a commercial non-domestic energy efficiency alliance for ESTA, which is a grouping of trade associations, professional bodies, that will really try and drive that commercial non-domestic energy efficiency in terms of policy with government, in terms of engagement with end users, because it's that jigsaw puzzle. If everyone's doing, one last thought about this, hugely revealing to me. So COVID has obviously created this massive concept for everyone of build back better, green recovery. And I think I've seen every number of polls, and everyone's saying this has really got to be the time. I think I saw one poll where it was 67% of people polled said we must build back better out of this pandemic. Yeah. We must do the right things. And what's intrigued me is any number of collaborations have sprung up, any number of groupings of this, groupings of that. You've got campaigns, you've got everything from Extinction Rebellion right down to the old-fashioned, really big grouping of people, collaborations. But in a funny sort of way, it's almost too complicated, and it's not too dissimilar to the structure with COP26 coming up. There are some key people pulling things together, but I get nervous, and I have to be honest, when I've seen when I was looking at what was happening policy-wise, for example, when I saw this sort of jet zero, not net zero, when all of a sudden there was 300 million available, 100 million, I've forgotten how much, but it was available, set up as some wonderful alternative fuel, probably hydrogen, actually. I'm not sure if hydrogen can be used in a plane. Someone will correct me after they finish listening to this podcast.
I don't want to comment on that.
But no, I'm wittering on a little bit about what I was passionate about, is that I think cohesive work from the human race is needed.
Yes.
It's just unfortunately at the moment we don't have very cohesive, joined up policies. But I must stress, that's not a political comment. That's just my concern that it's different strands coming in from different angles.
But one thing that's come across from me, and this isn't a question, it's an observation, that I didn't realise that ESTA as an organisation or a membership was as deep as this. I just thought, I'll join ESTA and I'll get all these benefits of being, I'll get a discount off my training, and I get all this documentation. Well, I didn't realise what was behind it. So I really appreciate you sharing that today. So I'm sure that I'm not the only one that thinks it's just a membership. It's a bit more.
Membership to me is a passion, and membership is really, I believe, membership used properly can be a solver of a lot of the world's problems. I'm a great believer in the cooperative movement, for example, the concept of cooperatives in fact, going back to the days of Green Deal. I work with Russell Smith, who some listeners will be aware of, Retrofit Works London. We created an SME supply chain cooperative to try and get some of that work that was going for Green Deal at the time to stop, to be honest with you, the mighties of this world, the Carillions, the big players getting all of the work, which was where I think the risk was.
Yeah.
But I'm a passionate believer in membership. Trade associations are all very different, and I have spent a lot of focus on the trade bodies I've run, and I have run trade associations in a wide range of sectors, including that dreaded funeral directing, bailiffs, a whole range of sectors. What I've generally tried to do is support members as businesses as much as specialists in their own field. So the sectors I've been involved with, generally, the trade bodies are very good at supporting their members as funeral directors or bailiffs or energy efficiency. But actually, and certainly more relevant for the SMEs, obviously, because the big corporate tend to have their own in-house teams. But for a lot of the SMEs members, a lot of the smaller members, it's about being a support mechanism.
Yeah.
And actually, I suppose even more important, but certainly linked to the end user engagement side, is my big focus for ESTA members has been helping them to get work. Now that sounds very pretentious. How can Mervyn or how can ESTA help Joe Public and Co. whatever energy efficiency specialist to get work? Collaboration, working with the Public Sector Sustainability Association, for example, 500 members from director level from all the range of public sector bodies. That's one methodology. Talking to property professionals, architects, designers, talking to other trade bodies, collaboration with BESA. We've just recently launched a new joint group, Energy Efficiency in Buildings group with BESA, Building Engineering Services Association, Facilities Managers Engineering Services. So that membership piece. But you're right, a trade body. Why do people join trade associations? Sometimes people join because they think it's the right thing. They want the logo. I remember trade bodies. I remember that construction company I belonged to. We had more medals. We had more logos than George Patton had on his chest. All his American medals. We had a whole row of logos, and we got them and we needed them because the customers said to get on our procurement process, you need to have that accreditation, that logo. ESTA there's no legal requirement to belong to ESTA. There's no overriding. I'm not aware of. I'd love to think that the major contractors all want ESTA membership to get onto their. We're looking to do that for ENCO, I should add, if we can get some ENCO recognition for some of the big players, and we're working on that. That's a separate piece. But no, overarching, the reason I hope it's value for money joining ESTA, and we always have this discussion about value for money within trade bodies, is that question, what are you doing for us? And I'm trying to convince. I mean, I'm having a number of discussions with global other countries about ESTA. Could the ESTA model work in other countries? Some countries have got very little energy efficiency. Some of it's all down to the public sector, not the private sector. And again, it's opportunities for ESTA members in the UK to trade outside, despite Brexit, because I have to be honest, whilst Brexit was going on, I was making sure I was really keeping in regular contact with European organisations, global. Equally, and something else that's changed, I think, in the last few months is that we've had some inquiries from overseas about companies coming in and wanting to come into the UK market, some through takeover rather than through, competitive. Some companies have just been bought. and now want an introduction into the UK market. They've bought a UK company and they want an introduction. Yeah. A range of reasons, but every trade association is different. Paul, you would find some of the bigger ones, really offers. I think my main focus, because I'm very much SME driven and very much focused about getting members work. I don't believe that is all massively part of all trade associations' raison d'etre.
Mervyn, it's been great talking to you today. There's one question that I normally like to ask my special guests, and I love to put them on the spot. Is there anything you can give as a takeaway today back to the industry?
I think I'd like to say back to that thing about as a non-expert looking in, I'd like to say what a bloody obviously sensational job our ESTA members can do, and anyone involved in energy efficiency to do, really, to help everyone meet their targets. I mean, with so many targets out there at the moment, climate emergencies, everyone's created, or not everyone, but so many organizations have created targets. And I do think that wonderfully well, the sector's got all the capabilities and technologies and the solutions to help everybody achieve those targets. All we need is a fair wind, less pandemic, more government policy, and I will certainly be carrying on and despite all the challenges, I will be pushing equally hard to get those solutions out there into the marketplace.
Brilliant.
You're doing a good job. You're doing a fantastic job. And I don't mean you, Paul. I mean, everyone in the energy efficiency space is doing a bloody good job. Keep it up. Keep going. Keep smiling. Keep safe.
I'm very proud to have you on our show today, because obviously you're leading ESTA, and it's a big part of the energy industry as far as I'm concerned. And you're doing a great job, and what you've just sort of demonstrated today it's really been great listening to you. So really appreciate your time, and thank you for coming today.
Hopefully come back on again later on.
Please come along. We need to keep this going and
do podcast number 2.
Yes, and we'll be less branding.
Yes, less branding. Sorry, Paul. Yes, yes. There are plenty of other opportunities available apart from that sandwich maker.
A lot of apologies later. So thank you, Mervyn. Thank you very much for the day.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you for listening today, and thank you to my special guest. And if you want to know more about managing your third largest expense, please go to our website on b2benergy.co.uk. That leaves me with one more thing to say. Be safe.